Awesome. Webinar is now live. We've got some participants coming in. Hey, everyone. Welcome, Dawn. So excited to see you again. Ryan, great to have you. Make sure that your chat is turned to panelists and attendees. We've got a great session for you. Tell us who you're coming from. Yeah, tell us who you are, where you're coming from, what do you do, what your role is. Megan, we'd love to hear from you. Jessica, love to hear from you. This is going to be one heck of an amazing session today. My name is Katie Ray. It's been a while since I've been on one of these. I'm so excited to be here. I am coming from beautiful Fort Worth, Texas, where we are about to have another freeze tonight. So, of course, I just got done gardening again, and we've got another freeze coming. Ryan, great to have you. We've got an awesome group. I'm going to let them introduce themselves here in just a bit. Or actually, let's just do some intros here real quick while people are coming in and dropping in the chat what they do. Keaton, I'll let you kick us off. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, great. So Keaton Robertson, currently live in Salt Lake City, coming from Workday. My primary role is Global Demand Content Manager. So anything that has to do with content from a sales copy perspective, typically including those conversations, really trying to build out and scale out our content practice at Workday.
I love that. That's awesome. We're so excited to have you. Erika, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Erika Davis. I'm the head of content at Greaser Consulting. So I work with teams to improve their content strategy and quality. I live in Seattle, Washington, and I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. We're excited to have you, Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Courreges. I'm the Global Content Enablement Lead for SAP, and I'm in Newtown Square, just outside of Philadelphia. We've got beautiful sunny weather here. Come visit.
Hey, don't tempt me with a good time. I'll have to take you to get some Philly cheesesteaks. And Theron, if you want to introduce yourself too.
Yeah, hey, it's beautiful here in central Pennsylvania, low 60s, sunny, and the hills and ridges. Yeah, my name is Theron Glenny. I'm the GM of Greaser Consulting, and I'll be your moderator today. So we're looking forward to a great webinar.
This is going to be so much fun. Hey, everyone, like I said, don't forget, drop first off, if you want to drop your LinkedIn in the chat, do that as well. Let's get connected. Tell us where you are coming from. What do you do? Just a reminder, today's session is brought to you by Greaser Consulting. I'm so excited about this. We have some really interesting discussions planned for you today. We want to make sure that you are using the chat, staying involved. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. One, this will be recorded and sent within 24 hours, so keep an eye on your email. If you have to drop out early or you want to pass it along, no worries, you'll get the recording in your email. Also, secondly, make sure that your chat is turned to panelists and attendees. Nothing's worse than having a really good insight or a great question and it's only sent to panelists. Not everyone else gets to see how smart you are, so make sure it's turned. But then most importantly, on the little below bar, if you make your screen super big, you will see next to raise hand a little Q&A box. In that Q&A box, ask any questions that you want. We're going to be taking them throughout the session today. This is going to be so much stinking fun. And I'm going to pass it over to Theron. So thanks, everyone. We're excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And we just want to give a big thanks to Sales Hacker for hosting this and Outreach for sponsoring it. Again, we're going to be talking about content supply chains. You may or may not ever heard those terms, but that's okay because today you're going to learn. And if you don't have a content supply chain, you'll know exactly what to do today to get one. And if you have one and you want to know some ways to improve it, we got you covered. SAP and Workday are two of the teams that we've worked with concerning content supply chains. And so we've got some awesome experts in Keaton and Catherine and Erika, and we're going to learn a lot today. So just one reminder that we do have a giveaway raffle. And one registrant will win a 60-minute consultation with Greaser Consulting around content supply chain. All right, so that's cool. And then also one attendee. So if you're attending this right now, you have the opportunity to win a 4-hour content audit of your sales engagement platform and content creation process. That's a big deal. 4-hour content audit and of your sales engagement platform and content creation process. So let's just dive in. We're gonna go through some questions here, and Catherine, Keaton, Erika, they're gonna give some great. They're gonna drop some knowledge with you, and then at the end we'll have some time to get into some Q&A. So if you have questions, like Katie said, make sure you put it into the Q&A so we can get to those. So question number one, and I'm gonna direct this first to Catherine.
Okay.
So, Catherine, how do you build a powerful content supply chain so every single seller has the right content at the right time?
That is a massive question to start with there. So I think that start to finish, one of the first things that you're going to need to do is really take a look at your sales organization, right? Currently, how are they currently structured? Where are their asset repository? What does their current supply chain look like, and where do we want to go with that in the future, right? Everything from who's going to be able to author that content, right? We have all sorts of SAP is just a tiny little company. So does everybody get to write their own sequences, or are we going to do a top-down approach? We still want to build in that flexibility that each one of those independent sales teams really needs, whether they're inside sales or external facing sales or our top 10 sellers, right? They need to have that flexibility to be able to retain and increase their success. So taking a look at that and figuring out where you're going to benchmark, right? What do our customers actually want? What's the reporting going to look like? What are our measures of success? And being able to really take a look at that sort of soup to nuts and figure out, okay, well, now that we've decided maybe what we think we want, what are some of those roadblocks? If we don't know what metrics we are, maybe we need to turn to the experts. What's a good average number of click-throughs or opens and that type of thing? So, it's really taking a very deep dive look, especially in larger organizations, and getting the right contacts on the project at the right time.
No, that's really good. That's really good. And what I hear you saying is, you got to build in a way that your sellers are going to have confidence in the content. If you don't do that, then it's more of the dictator approach, right? And people aren't gonna have confidence in actually using the content. Erika, we're going to go to Keaton here in a second, but Erika, can you define just what is a content supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think if you were to ask, the average one of our customers or a company that's similar, I think content supply chain would probably mean something really different. And so when we say content supply chain, we really mean, how do you align the messaging that your end users are using with your overall marketing strategy? So it's not just about writing sequences or writing, templates. It's really about how is that messaging at the end of that content supply chain being used to align every single touch point within your organization, cross-departmentally, product, customer success, marketing, sales, and how are you empowering your end users to really carry out those directives that are coming from above. And this is a spoiler because I was going to talk about this later, but I don't think you can really talk about it enough and how important it is that feedback loop really works in both directions. So it's not only that, leadership is telling SDRs or BDRs or AEs how to talk to customers, but it's also getting that valuable information from SDRs or BDRs or AEs that actually gets carried back up. So you get as much data as possible from your whole process. And a content supply chain, the major function of that is really to align everyone internally working towards that same goal and making sure you're all in agreement and you're working in harmony to create those processes and carry out your initiatives.
That's great. Thank you. Keaton, what do you have to add here when it comes to building a powerful content supply chain?
Yeah, first, couldn't agree more with what Erika and Catherine just mentioned. But there are so many people involved in this process. And I think the first step is ensuring that you have some type of documented approach so that everyone's aligned and pulling in the same direction. And then the second piece is just understanding what the life cycle looks like. That's going to be different for every company based on the permissions and whatever else. And so you need to think through, okay, for a specific piece of content that's coming from marketing, or some great idea that a sales leader is championing that we're going to be getting marketing supporting content for. What does that full life cycle look like for that content, both in the instance and just generally for every iteration of that content that sales will use? document that, make sure that you've got clear roles and responsibilities through that process. I mean, it's a big undertaking, but for it to be effective and for those feedback loops to be in place, it's essential that takes place.
That's really good. What are some of the functions that need to be in place that, in order to have a content supply chain, that you just have to have? It's a requirement. I open that up to the group.
Yeah, I mean, just the first thing that comes to my mind is just someone who can own the content strategy, right?
Yeah,
If you don't have one person who can kind of guide the conversation, you're going to be in a rough place, and you're going to need content writers. That could be marketing, that could be sourced from sales. But I would say that those are probably the top two most important folks, and really it just depends on resourcing. Sometimes I wear all those hats, right? Sometimes I'm leveraging other people, but
yeah. And I would add to that dedicated resources, right? It's not just a side job that you have on top of something. It's got to be a focused approach. Otherwise, it doesn't get the necessary priority that it should. Oh, it's just a PowerPoint. They just want more content. That's fine. Somebody else can do that. So dedicated resources to manage that supply chain is a critical component, I would say.
That's really good.
Yeah, and I would add, so on top of sort of the owner, the manager, and the writer, I also think to complete that feedback loop, you need an analyst. So you need someone in there saying, what are the benchmarks? What are our goals here? And are we measuring up to that? Yes or no? And if yes, great. What are we doing that's working? And if no, how are we going to reiterate that? And what is the cycle going to look like? Are we going to do this monthly, weekly, quarterly, do different types of content, have different sorts of check-in points? And then you need enablement, because you can have the best content in the world, but if you don't have, it's usually the team manager, or maybe you have an enablement person whose sole job it is to enable end users and these tools and with this messaging. But you definitely need that feedback loop to kind of carry data back up the chain as well. Because I see a lot of teams get stuck at that writing process where they say, okay, we've sort of thrown all of this content at our reps and they're not using it. What's wrong? And then I'll go in and I'll talk to reps and they'll say, I spend 2 hours just looking for the right thing to send. And that, to me, it might not be a writing problem. That might actually be an enablement issue. And there might not be anybody owning that function. So those two, I think, are really important too.
Love it. It's great stuff. So there you go, folks. You got to have ownership over the functions that are needed. And like Keaton said, I wear a bunch of these hats, from time to time, right? But someone has to own it, have the responsibility for it, or it's just not going to work. Or everyone's going to end up doing whatever they want, and that doesn't always end up well. There's some good things there, but then there's not such good things. So I'm going to move on here to the next question, and that is what are the top 3 considerations that you kept in mind while building your content supply chain? Keaton, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So I think the first thing to think through is governance, right? There are companies that have Wild West. Everybody can create whatever they want, all the way to something that's more structured, right? In terms of the review and what the team should be using. If you fall on the far end of either side, I think you're going to run into issues. So you need to think through, how are we going to make sure that we are ensuring the highest quality content, that there's some type of check and balance situation in place. And that's going to vary slightly from organization to organization. But I think at the end of the day, it's critical that you're positioning that as enablement for the end user. Like, all of this is there to support the end user's work, and they should have full autonomy to be creative, to come up with great content, and use that. If it's positioned in a way where it's like, okay, you can create content, but you need to go through this process, and you can only do the X, Y, and Z. You may have some challenges, versus positioning it as, you can create whatever you want. We're here to support you and help you, and we'll help you along the way. So I think that's the top consideration. The second one is thinking about top down versus bottom up, right? I talked about the process earlier, making sure it's documented. You're going to want to document it, from my perspective, in both ways. From those priority programs that are aligned to your go-to-market strategy, how you're collaborating with marketing, and then how are you also accommodating all these great ideas that are coming from individual sales users and sales leaders, so that you can all play nicely in the sandbox and make sure that everyone's pulling in the right direction. And Catherine touched on this a little bit earlier, but just defining what the reporting data model looks like. It's easy to think that you can jump into outreach and just look at your flat reply rate and say, okay, this is how effective we're doing. But the data is only as good as the actual context and structure that you put around it. And so if you want to look at those specific categories, you just need to make sure that's all defined really clearly so that you have really good data at the back end. And so having that data model built out is very important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you touched on one thing there, right? If you're only looking at like a flat reply rate, you're going to miss the fact that maybe an event, let's say an event email went out and it's actually had 7 opens, no replies, but it's had 7 opens from one particular recipient, right? That prospect probably didn't open it 7 times. They've probably gone and hit forward, and it's now bouncing around an organization, which is going to prompt that follow-up. So you've got to know what to look out for that truly gives you that insight into this is something that I need to follow up on for your sales teams. So I completely agree with that, Keaton. Yep.
That's great. Erika, when you're consulting, how do you what are the 3 considerations that you would say, hey, you need to keep this in mind as you're building this out?
Yeah, so I think the most important one is resourcing, because often there's not a lot of wiggle room there. It's like you either have the resources to do this or you don't. And so it's unhelpful to start off with this sort of ideal state grand plan that is just unattainable right now. I think it's really important to be pragmatic and realistic when you're building out strategy. And even if you look at sort of the science of behavior change, right? If you set goals you can't hit, it's not going to encourage anyone. You're not going to get forward momentum. So you want to create goals that you're very, very confident you can hit, because a lot of what we're talking about here is change management. And so the first thing I'll always ask is, I'll ask questions that get at what resourcing do you have internally and what are your strengths, right? So if, for example, 99% of your meetings are coming from phone calls, why would you create a strategy where you're trying to get most of your meetings from emails? That doesn't make sense. And so you need to align your current strengths with your strategy, and you sort of need to have an ideal state and understand what your current state is, and maybe create some interim steps that you're very confident that you can hit, and sort of have this roadmap. So that's all one consideration, I would say, right? To have a really clear, honest, pragmatic idea about what you're good at, what your strengths are, and what resourcing that you have. And then this is really adjacent to really understand, what are you looking to do now? What are you looking to do in 6 months? And what are you looking to do in 2 or 3 years? Because again, it doesn't make sense to invest a lot of resourcing building out a content supply chain that has sort of a really short-term focus, because ideally you want to create content that you're going to be able to use for a year. You want to create some evergreen content that you can keep using, and then you're also going to want to create some event sequences or some event-based material that you need to sort of go in and reiterate every month or 2. So you really want to think about, what's going to happen now, what's going to happen in 6 months, what's going to happen in 1 or 2 or 3 years, so you can build with that longevity in mind. And then again, the last thing, and I'll probably say this as much as possible, is you need to involve your reps. How are your reps going to be involved, and how prepared are they to do so? Just as an example, I've gone into teams before that say, our reps aren't using content, there's no adoption, we're not getting good insights and data, which is the whole reason that we're spending all this money on these tools. And I'll say, okay, great, when can we schedule consultations with your reps? And then we'll say, well, they're too busy, they're selling. Can't you just write this content without their input? And it's like, how are we supposed to do that? How are we supposed to write content that reps believe in without consulting them? That's an impossible ask. And so I think it's very, very important to consider, obviously you want to be respectful of their time, but you also need to consider how they're involved and the importance of their involvement in any content supply chain that's built without consulting end users. I wouldn't have confidence in.
And Erika, I would tag on to that when we're going through that interview process, for lack of a better term, right, with the reps, a lot of times the sales managers will say, oh no, I'm going to join, I've got to save their time, and they will completely suck the air out of the room and speak party line, and then the reps just kind of, they fade off, and then they're not listening. They have no engagement in it at all. And I'm like, this is why we have outreach. So
yeah. Yeah, and I would say another thing I've heard from managers is, we'll get feedback from reps and they'll say, "Why haven't they told me that before? I ask all the time for input and they've never told me that before. Why are they telling you this? Like what's your secret?" And I'll say, "Well, if you ask them for feedback and when they give you feedback, you give them a bunch of extra work, they're not going to give you feedback because they think it's easier to just go off, write their own content themselves and sort of just plug and play on their own." And so when we go in and we're doing consultation, we're saying, "Hey, we're actually going to do this whole thing for you. All we want to know is what you don't like about your current process so we can make it better." And reps will gladly criticize things they don't like. And, I think that's one thing. It's generally true. It's like people are willing to give you very direct feedback if they know that work is going to be yours. And so I think that can be important too, is just to preface those types of interviews with, "You're not going to be responsible for making all of these changes. We just really need to know what you need and don't need, because this is essentially is helping you with your process."
Can I ask this? I'm sorry, Keaton. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention, I feel like a lot of this goes back to just fundamentals of change management, right? Like, what is the brand for this new process, right? When we talk about reviewing feedback, this isn't something that just happens one-off. And I see the question in the chat: do your reps get a say in the content creation process? And that's exactly what Erika's talking about. It's such a critical component. It's not a one-off. Okay, here's this program for marketing. And then you reach out to one CSD, or sorry, that's our internal sales development rep. You reach out to an SDR and say, "Hey, do you have some feedback on this?" It's actually a baked process, and there's branding and awareness around this feedback process so that the sales team knows that that there's that collaboration and buy-in.
Yeah, and it's not just one time, right? You're going to have to go back and say, "Okay, well, we've looked at the metrics from this and something's not hitting," right? Everybody drops off at the third step. What's going on there? So it's an iterative step, and you keep coming back. So absolutely, reps are not only involved, but hopefully a lot of times driving it and driving the changes, driving what's needed. So you got to have a good intake process in that supply chain. You've got to make it easy for them to submit what it is that they want to see on the platform.
Yeah. How do you do that? Like, so what I'm hearing is that there has to be a feedback loop. If you don't have the feedback loop, then what happens is that the confidence of the reps is not there with what's being created, right? So they're not going to use it because they don't have confidence in it, or it doesn't make sense to them, or whatever. There has to be that feedback loop. How best do you get that feedback? Is it, "Hey, I'm a manager, and I mean, this is what I think it's not," right? But like, do I just send out an email, "Hey, give me some feedback on this new sequence. What do you think about it?" Like, is it that, or does that feel to the rep like, "Oh man, like I don't have time to like send this email and give you some feedback"? Or is it, "Hey, we need to schedule an actual session here and talk for 30 minutes and just be open"? Is it one-on-one? Is it a small group? Is it a large group? Like, what have you found to work best?
So I've found that sort of like weekly or biweekly office hours, right, for small groups, because your inside sales rep teams and your outside, your sales, your SDRs, right, are going to have different targets. They're going to have the second step is a call, and I don't ever make calls. Or, they're going to have, I need more calls. I need more LinkedIn, more calls, and less emails. Why is this whole sequence emails? So smaller groups with very specific feedback for what it is that they need works for us.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep the audience of the content in mind, right? I think it's easy to think, "Oh, here's a marketing program; it's applicable to everybody," and that's what Catherine was just touching on. And I think it'll depend on the organization. I think some companies, it may make sense to do a round robin and get feedback from different people, or having regular people that you go to for that feedback that are, either volunteers or nominated via a manager or something.
That's good.
Yeah, I think one other thing I would add to this would be, how you present this opportunity to be involved in the content creation process, I think is really important. And if you present it as, especially in a larger organization, if you present it as sort of an opportunity to grow, right? So if someone's trying to make a transition from, let's say, an SDR to an AE, or, to marketing or to product, or, someone wants to make a move internally, presenting this as part of a leadership role, or part of a move upward in the company, not only can that make the participation a little bit more engaging for that rep, but also it ensures they take ownership and responsibility for that, because the last thing that you want to do is tell your team, okay, we need your feedback, and then people show up and they're just like, when can we get out of here? They need to feel ownership and responsibility. And another thing is to reward that participation. I know one thing I tell a lot of our clients is that a shout out on Slack or on LinkedIn from a director or VP level, that goes a long way in terms of morale and a sense of belonging. And so just rewarding and shouting out that feedback is super helpful.
Some folks on the webinar here might be asking themselves, like, do we even have a content supply chain? Like, I think we have one, like, maybe, do we? I'm not sure. Like, how do you, like, what can you tell folks today? Like, how can they know for sure that they have one? Like, what would be the indicators?
You can certainly tell when you don't have one. You don't know what your metrics are. You don't know what your sales reps want. You don't know how frequently you're updating it, right? So I think you definitely know if you don't have one. And then building that out, I would almost say, large or small companies, start at the bottom and say to your reps, what is it that you need, right? We know where our asset repository is. We know where we can. Oh, you need marketing for SAP? Here's a folder with 10 million assets in it. That's not going to work, right? So if that's your content supply chain right now, like, here's our marketing folder, everybody go and find what you want. You don't have one yet. So, Keaton, I'm not sure what you guys do in terms of how you would then say, how do you have a content supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, you need someone who, because it's the two parts, right? Because you want to make sure the tail isn't wagging the dog, so to speak, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And back to what I was saying earlier, right? There should always be this recommendation of, here's best practice, here's what, and there should be someone who is kind of the known expert. And just like the relationship between SDR and sales, right, in terms of qualifying opportunity, there should be that give and take. Where this is best practice, but also an openness to trying new things, right? But if you don't have someone who can kind of mediate that and drive the conversation in the first place, then you definitely don't have a content supply chain.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think a good question that I would ask if I were to go into a company and do some digging about their content supply chain, and they were to say, oh yeah, we've got a content supply chain, I think I would ask, okay, when is the next meeting on your calendar that's dedicated to addressing content and your go-to-marketing strategy, and how those two things really fit in. And if I get a blank face in return, I think you don't have a content supply chain, because you don't have dedicated time with identified leaders in each department. And this could be, I saw a question about, what about a small company? Like, what if I can't have like 8 people managing my sales engagement platform and my content supply chain? And this could be one person, right? It could be that at your company, you could be the first sales hire, you could be the first sales and marketing hire, and the functions that are needed don't really change. The scale of those functions, of course, will change, but the fact that you need someone writing content, you need someone analyzing it, you need someone to own the solution, like, those aren't going to change. So the time on your calendar could just be a work block for yourself. But one thing that I see a lot is that sales content in particular, is kind of an aside of someone's job or many people's jobs. And so I think it really sets you apart when you start to dedicate time specifically to focus on your sales content strategy, whether that's with, yourself, with your team, with content committee, but making sure that time is on the calendar. That's a good indicator that you're working towards having a functional supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe the last thing I would mention is these are all really tightly interconnected, right? The content strategy, the content that exists within your outreach instance, and the performance of that content are all tied together. So another way is if on the reporting side, everybody's using different sequences and there's no way to really know if something is performing or not, or like, is this specific type of messaging working? Yeah, you definitely don't have content supply chain.
Good. So the functions again that we had mentioned earlier that you have to have, no matter whether you're a small company or a large company, is what? Content ownership. You got to have content manager. You got to have someone, that they might be the strategist as well, someone that writes, and then someone that also is the content enablement. Like, hey, here's the content. Here's how it works. Here's when to use it. Like, there has to be enablement, and then someone that analyzes it. And again, if you're a small company, that might be like one or two people that wear those hats. But you have to have those. If you don't have ownership over those, things are going to fall apart. So,
I think you guys are making it. I think we're all making it sound overwhelming in nature. But starting small and finding the content. Start with one or two sequences. Right. Start small. Start with one or two sequences, and figure out, okay, this is how I can manage this. And instead of saying, it's too much, all at one time, it's too much. Start with the first thing, okay? What is it we actually want to accomplish? All right, we want to sell this. How are they selling it now? What kind of other content can we get to them to make it better? So
that's good. Into bite-sized pieces. I like it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to start with transparency into what your process currently is. Like, one thing that I'll say to reps is, this process is really a container for what you're currently doing. It's not that we're going to come in and completely replace your workflow. And that goes for different levels of automation. Like, I think sometimes people think of sales content supply chain and they just think we're talking about a bunch of templated automated messaging, but you can have a functional content supply chain with zero messaging that goes out without a rep's sort of fingers typing on the keyboard, right? So I do think that when we're talking about a sales content supply chain, the first step is really identifying what you're currently doing. What are the steps in your sales process? And once you can do that, you can say, okay, what are the things that we need to change? What are our goals? When are we going to measure them? What's the next step after that? How do we want this strategy to evolve? And then you've got really a way to work on it, I guess. But I don't think it's necessary to go in and just overhaul everything. In fact, I don't think that's the best way to approach it. So I agree with you, Catherine. I think it's very important to get clarity and transparency and understand what's happening and how can we just iterate slightly.
Yeah, I love that. And every company should have their go-to-market plans, right? Which should provide some lens of priority to make it really easy to say, hey, this is the motion we want to try out first. And you can have, a couple of sequences or whatever that model looks like, and you can start there and then build out.
That's good. All right, next question for y'all. I hope everyone on here is getting a lot of value. You should be. There's a lot of your answers are fantastic. So, thank you, panelists. So here's his question for you. What is the biggest roadblock on your path to sales maturity, and how do you plan to avoid it? Erika, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd start by saying, there's two sort of high-level goals that I focus on when I'm thinking about roadblocks. And one would be, how do we scale workflow? And the other would be, how do we get data and insights, right? And so there's kind of different roadblocks to both of those things. If you're really trying to focus on scaling workflow, you really need to focus on adoption, because if you don't have adoption and everyone's sort of doing their own siloed process, you're not going to actually get those data and insights that you want. Whereas if you're only focusing on data and insights, but you're not really working on making things more efficient and scaling and sort of combining things when you can, so there's no extra effort that doesn't need to be going in, or sometimes, you're not A/B testing, so you're not really learning the difference between what you think is best and what's actually being effective. So you need to have a balance of being more efficient, optimizing your workflow, but then you also need to make sure it's leading to the insights and data that you're looking for. And obviously adoption is a major roadblock. I think, again, I said I'd say this a few times, that consulting reps and end users is the most important thing when driving adoption. And I think the other roadblock that can come in with both of those goals is not having ownership over the functions. So again, sometimes when I ask a very simple question, which is, who's creating your sales messaging? The answer is very often, well, sometimes I do it. Sometimes there's a couple reps that have permission that do it. Sometimes marketing does it. They send us stuff once in a while. And sometimes, it's another team, or we have these sequences from product. There's content coming from all over the place. And so I think having clear ownership over those functions and defining those roles is really important before you can carry out that process.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And maybe just dovetailing off of that, my mind immediately goes to change management, right? When it comes to roadblocks, I mean, everything that Erika just mentioned falls squarely within, are we leveraging an effective change management strategy to ensure that when the content is created and we're enabling that there's the feedback loops in place. And then, ultimately just documentation. Like, I know that that's not boring. It's not sexy. It's not fun work, but someone has to put it on paper so that everyone knows exactly what's going on. And you can't do that without having someone responsible for the content supply chain.
And I think for me, I would say enablement. Enablement drives adoption. So enablement's been huge for us, right? Being able to take that iterative look at, okay, well, we told them what to do and we gave them what they said they wanted. Are they using it? How's it working? And kind of going back through that cycle. So yeah, that takes responsibility of over all the functions, and it manages change function. So at the end of the day, for me, enablement of those two things would be the icing on the cake.
Let's take it a little bit deeper here. I don't know if I'd say that deeper is the right word for it, but let's just say I want to start a content supply chain today. All right. I'm asking the panelists here, Catherine, Keaton, Erika, what would be the first thing that you would do? First thing, very first thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would step back and audit what is currently going on. I mean, Erika mentioned earlier documenting current process, right? Sitting down, and it's total safe space. Like, what you have is the current state, and understand what you're currently doing, and then taking that one step further. I can't imagine that there isn't an SDR out there who has a Word document or a Google sheet or a spreadsheet with all of the content that they've aggregated from their peers and whoever else. I mean, that really is like, it's like their tribal go-to guide for the content they want to use.
Yeah.
And so sort that, right? Reach out and start compiling that, see where there are synergies. That could even help you prioritize where you want to start from a content supply chain perspective. But yeah, in short, audit.
Audit.
I think it's really important to set proper expectations. I think, helping reps, helping managers, directors, all the way up to the leadership level, like, it's really important to have very clear expectations about what the outcome of all this is. I think the content supply chain for sales is a fairly new concept, right? Sales engagement platforms are still sort of growing quickly in adoption, and a lot of people haven't created this function internally yet. And so really selling the value internally is important, and the first thing that I would do to make sure that everyone is on board. And then doing a lot of listening, really understanding what people need, what their reservations are, what they're excited about, and really molding. To Keaton's point about change management, I think it's really important. You can't ignore the difficulties that come with behavior change. Even if you're trying to get to an ideal state, you have to be pragmatic about how you implement that. And so I think setting proper expectations and then really listening and understanding before you kind of impose a structure on an organization is really important.
And speaking of structures of organization, I think that for me, I would work to figure out and document clearly what we have today and where we want to go. Because without those two things, you're just going to flounder around. So you've got to know where you are today. What is our content supply chain? We don't have one, but here's what we want. We want to be able to say this content works and here's how to onboard a new employee so that they're successful straight out of the gate. And this is what our customers want to see from us. They don't want us to say, hey, $50 off, attend today, events in an hour. We know that they don't want that, but how do we get to a better state of that engagement with our customers as well? So
that's great. Great answers. Well, hey, Katie Ray from Sales Hacker, what do you got for us? Come on. These guys want some more questions. Let's get it going. Let's rev it up.
We have a lot of questions. I know some of us needed a little more expansion. And I'm so thankful that all of you really hit on this idea of getting the feedback from sellers, because coming from the sales perspective, it's really easy to look at, marketing sending us something else, like another thing to push off to the side because I don't have the time to do this. So I think there's some curiosity around how do you get salespeople to buy into this as a revenue generating activity, right? Because so much of our focus is, if this doesn't move the needle for us, this is a waste of my time. So what are some steps that marketing can do? And then also some steps that sales managers can do to help get that buy-in. That's so critical.
I think finding those champions that are using the platform that have had success out the gate, right? We've got a couple of really high-level sales reps that proclaim from the mountaintop, this is what works, and this is how you can do it. So having those champions within your organization that truly understand the platform, that have seen how success can come from sort of what you've created for supply chain content.
Yeah, I love that. I would add to that, if there are folks on the marketing side writing content and throwing over the fence, the marketing folks need to know who the sales folks are who are receiving and incorporating and providing that feedback, and vice versa. There needs to be like a named relationship there. Otherwise it's not going to work. But I feel like that feedback loop, what Erika is saying, like there needs to be a very clear understanding for every person in the sales organization that even though marketing is creating the content, sales has a say in what it sounds like, what it looks like, for it to be effective.
Yeah, all too often marketing content is going to be a 1-pager or a 2-pager. We don't want 1-pagers. And so it's almost a mind shift in terms of what do we actually need to do? How are we going to get to that bottom dollar line and that bottom dollar snippet of information so that we can not have 2-pagers going out?
Right. I love the emails. And let's face it, as salespeople, as much as we bash these items, we all use them. I mean, if we're just honest with ourselves, right? How often do we just use a sequence and we know that we have to add content to it? So we just look for a little marketing 1-pager or a short little video, right? Like we've all done this. But I think one of the most interesting things about this, one is not only just getting that buy-in, because it's so easy for us as sellers just to completely write something off. But one of the things I really liked, Catherine, that you had really hit home on was talking about sales enablement and like enabling our reps to actually use this. And one of the questions I had that came from that is, what does that education look like? Because it's really easy for enablement to be told, share this with your reps. And so we type up a really pretty email on how this is a best practice and why they should use this and what their outcomes should be and how to track this in Salesforce and outreach and whatever. And that's that. How do you encourage reps by saying, hey, this is a strategy that we have. This is the feedback that we got from you. How do we really educate our reps to use those tools and resources as best as they can be?
It doesn't even start off with an email. I would say it starts off with an all hands on call, and then engaging calls where you're actually training them out of the gates. And you start with, here's what the success stories look like, right? And now we're going to make we're going to make your life easier so that those things that work are easily repeatable for you, that are specialized and customized to the way you want to see them.
One of the things, sorry, you go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention, I do want to be slightly respectful to the amount of time. I don't know what it's like for other organizations. I know for us, enablement is just pounded all the time. They are leaned on for everything. And so I think prioritizing as well. I think there are absolutely programs where you want to do the all hands, right? But there are also other programs that maybe aren't as high priority, or they don't require such a significant lift, and just scoping that. But yeah, I agree with Catherine. Like they need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think to kind of tie this question back to how do you get buy-in from salespeople, I think the better the discovery and the listening is in the very beginning of the creation cycle, the easier that enablement person is going to have. They're just going to have an easier time enabling. And I think when I go in and consult, like I've used outreach as an SDR and as an AE, and so I know for my own process, regardless of how different it was from place to place, like I know that there is a lot of value, and a lot of times reps don't see that. And so I think I have never met a sales rep that doesn't see value in operationalizing their sales process. Like no rep is saying, I want to do more manual activity. I want to just like make things really complicated and put more effort in than's necessary because I have a lot of time and I'm not that concerned with getting more meetings or closing more deals, right? It says no sales rep ever. So I think it's really important to find like what is the thing that they value, to not say like this is what's important and I want you to believe this, but to say, okay, what about your process right now? Where are you wasting time? Where do you wish, if you had a magic wand and you could just wave your magic wand and fix a couple of things in your process, what would those be? And then fixing it for them. That's, I think, how you get buy-in, is by giving them those really quick wins, which typically is fairly simple at the beginning. So I just wanted to tie it back to that buy-in from the beginning.
And not to mention that when you come back at the end of that cycle and say, hey, here's what we did to fix this problem that you identified, it just creates this full circle story, which is really compelling.
Yeah.
You know, as we look at this cyclical experience, one of the things that kind of comes to mind for me, and I'm curious, I feel like I already know the answer, but I think it's important for y'all to share your thoughts on this, is this doesn't have to be just someone in marketing coming up with this, right? Sellers can take the initiative and bring this to our content teams, right? And really own what that process can look like. And I know at the very beginning we started talking about, you know, how do we create this, right? Is this some fictional idea that sounds really good, or how do we actually apply this, and who should really manage the process, and what does that look like? And I think one thing that's been really interesting is sellers taking a lot more initiative and saying, this is something that I want to see differently. How do we work together to make this happen? Catherine, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with you. I think that's how it's going to be a better, more cohesive thing, especially if it's done structuredly, right? And that's small, large, medium-sized companies. They all have got to sort of figure out where it is that they want to go with that. Whether their reps are writing their own content and then you're just auditing it, or whether you have sort of more of a top-down approach and you're saying, this is what we heard you say and this is who can edit that content.
And let's face it, as a wild and unruly rep that I once was, I loved creating content, just pulling it from wherever. So it's always important to have someone to come in and just double check, make sure everything's okay. So I think that's really great. And a constant theme that I've been really reflecting on the past year and a half has just been cross-functional alignment and how that creates for more successful teams. And I think that's something through this topic that we've really been discussing today, is the value of really aligning our sellers and our marketing team and even product management or product marketing, and really understanding where everyone fits for this goal, because it's just so easy for us to say, oh, so-and-so dropped the ball, right? Marketing didn't give us what we need. Product marketing didn't give us what we need. Field marketing, as sellers, it's really easy for us to do that. So it's exciting to hear so many different ways that we can really take ownership of what some of these processes look like, take a little bit off of your guys' backs and help a little bit more, and really create that unified relationship, right? Because at the end of the day, marketing can hit their number and sales can still not hit their number, and vice versa. And so it's so important for us, if our true goal is to really make the company better and hit those numbers, to work together.
I think one of the things, Katie, that
Yeah.
we see is that if you do have like if marketing is creating a bunch of content, is that someone has to take that marketing content and they have to translate it into sales speak. Because the marketing conversation is more of a broad, this is the company talking, it's a one-to-many conversation, whereas the sales conversation is like me to you, right? It's one-to-one. And so there has to, and this is a part of the content supply chain. Like you have to, if you have marketing content, you have to translate the messaging, right? It's great that you have it, but you got to translate that messaging into sales speak. And so just something to think about. If you're out there and you've got a marketing team that's supplying a lot of your sales content, take a look at it, because you may need to, have someone translate that into sales speak, so that your reps, your team is going to have more confidence in it. A lot of times reps are not going to use it because it's like, this is too markety for me. Like, this is not how I was going to say it. You know what I'm saying? So it's really important.
And just to scope that a touch further, right? Theron, I'm hearing you talk about like sales copy content that you would use in outreach, templates, snippets, sequences, not necessarily a white paper or some type of customer-facing marketing asset. This is like a sales copy piece of content. I also just wanted to touch on that. Ultimately, it's everyone's responsibility to build pipeline, right? In marketing, they have unique metrics. Maybe it's not tied to pipeline. In sales, obviously, very closely tied to actual closed revenue. But we're all trying to build pipeline and grow the revenue for the company. And that happens in various ways. And I think it takes a touch of vulnerability to step forward and say, it can happen. It can happen through a marketing event. It can happen through someone who's interested in a white paper. It can happen through a really creative sales program that's originated there. But I think coming to the table and having that amount of vulnerability and saying like, hey, this is the goal, building pipeline. Let's leverage all of the resources available to build the best plan ever.
Really like that. Leveraging all the resources to build the best plan ever. We got a question here from Jill asking about how should content be organized? Do we map it to specific stages in the sales processes, map to the buyer's journey, the buyer personas? What are some best practices that y'all have seen on what this should look like?
I love the Texas y'all. I wish you the best of luck in the freeze, but I would say that I would probably say that we tie it to the buyer's journey, right? And different aspects. You may have different collections that go in different ways, right? If you're looking at event sequences, it's going to be more tied to the marketing, right? Marketing moves and what boulders do we have upcoming, so that event collection is driven that way. Otherwise, if you're looking at sort of maybe an evergreen sequence like Erika was talking about, this isn't about a hard sale now. You've been our customer for 10 years. We just want to kind of make sure that we stay in touch so that if you have a problem, you have my name. If you have a need, maybe we can solve that right now. And staying in touch with that type of evergreen. If it's a net new or outbound sales that the goal is to just get a new in the door, then you're going to follow that buyer's journey. So
I like that. So it's really just like anything in marketing, right? Any type of outsourced, or not outsourced, but any type of output that you're generating, right, is going to be geared towards what you're trying to accomplish. So you wouldn't do a prospecting sequence for somebody that really should be in a nurture campaign, right?
Yeah.
So great insights. I know we've only got a few minutes left. So one thing that I would love to hear from all of you is really, as we kind of summarize what this discussion has been today, it's been, well, I can't even really summarize because we've gone all over the place, but I've loved it. But what would y'all say is probably like one or two key takeaways? If I was just to catch just this little last 5 minutes, what would those nuggets be? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in first go for it.
Your turn, Keaton.
Yeah, not everybody go at one time. Yeah, I mean that's difficult. I would say documentation, right? It's just the first thing. Like sit down, look at what you're currently doing, current state, document that, and then from there try and figure out where to go. So
For me, it would be identifying the right resources and ensuring because, again, SAP is just a tiny little company. So identifying the right resources and ensuring that those are dedicated resources. That's been critical for me.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say have a feedback loop that goes in two directions minimum, and then also have a clear schedule about when that feedback is going to be delivered, what the goal of that feedback is, sort of what are the next steps it's going towards. So whatever the size of the company or the stage of the company, I think you can start with that, even if that's with 2 people or 2,000 or 200,000. I think it always kind of starts with where are we at, where do we want to go, what are the steps that we need to get there, and what does that look like on the calendar. I think that's, approaching this just like you'd approach any other initiative would be a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely. And if you don't know the answers to those, finding the right team to help you with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go off of what Catherine said from a resource standpoint. Someone's got to own it. And, and unless you have ownership over the functions that you need to have in place for a content supply chain, it's going to be really difficult to build anything that's going to be sustained over the long haul. So all these are great. They all flow together. They're all really needed. But my answer would be ownership over the functions.
Like that. These are so great. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you after the call, how would they best do that?
Sure. They can find me on LinkedIn and reach out that way. You can go to our website, and we got Drift Enable there, so you can just chat with us or book a time with us. There's multiple ways, but I'd say that either LinkedIn or just head to our website. We've got more details around like the different functions of sales engagement too that you can learn about and watch some videos that are helpful for folks.
Yep, definitely. LinkedIn works great.
Perfect.
Yep, same LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, today has been so much fun. I've learned a lot about this because honestly, this was a new topic for me, but it's just one of those just makes sense to do and really owning the full process from start to finish and figuring out how to apply the new content and educating your sellers and marketing people. And so this has been so exciting for me. With that, I know that we are at the end of time, but from Sales Hacker, we just want to say thank you so much to Greaser Consulting. This has been such a fun session. I did drop the link to their website in there, so go give them a shout if you've got any questions. And yeah, I will let everyone go. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we really appreciate all y'all. Thank you so much.